Welcome to today's webcast, hosted by the Sales Management Association. I'm Bob Kelly, Sales Management Association Chairman. Today's presenter is no stranger to Sales Management Association audiences, Leff Bonney from Florida State University. Leff Bonney is Associate Professor of Sales and Marketing at Florida State University's College of Business. He also serves as Director of Executive Programs and works within the Florida State University Sales Institute, recognized as one of the United States' top university sales programs. Leff helped launch the International Collegiate Sales Competition, the largest event of its kind, hosting over 350 sales students from across the U.S. Leff founded the Sales Educators Academy, an innovative program that helps professors integrate corporate sales training techniques into business school curricula, and serves on the Sales Education Foundation's advisory board. Leff, welcome to you. It's always great to have you with us.
Hey, so it is great to be with everybody today, and I want to just quickly, sort of as Bob said, I don't think I need to rehash the introduction. Thank you for that, Bob. We do work at FSU, and so in addition to that, work at Vantage Point Performance, which some of you are also probably familiar with. I know there are frequent guests on the SMA webinars. But the idea here is to share with you guys today some of that what works research that we've done at FSU over the years. And so very excited to talk a little bit about this idea of how can we use some research and really a data-driven approach to be smarter about the processes that we're using with our sales teams every day. But I want to start with just a simple little thought exercise for everyone on the call today. And I want to give you a simple mission, right? So congratulations, everyone on the call today has been enlisted into a military unit, and your unit is located at the star in the bottom left corner of this diagram. And the story here is that you and your team, you have a team of 10 other people, are sitting on the side of the road, and a Jeep drives up and hands you a map that looks not unlike this one, and said, and a messenger says to you, we need you to take out the cannons that are located at each of the X's on this map. There are cannons. They are raining artillery down on our other troops in a different part of the battlefield. And so we need your team of 10 people to go and take out these cannons. Now, this should be an easy mission. These cannons, these are cannon guys, cannon army infantry. They're not designed to fight. They're designed to shoot cannons. So this should be a piece of cake. And so my question, rhetorically, would be, what would you do, right? If you had 10 people located at the star and you had these 4 X's, each marking the location of a enemy unit, what would you do? Like, how would you go about taking out these other 4 locations? Now, I do this exercise all the time with people in executive training programs, and the answers are always quite entertaining. There's always the shock and awe approach that gets presented, which is we take all 10 of the people, we would hit one of the X's as hard as we could and take it out, and then quickly move from one at a time, taking out each one. There's also the divide and conquer method, which is that we would divide our team into some number of men and women, and we would attack each of these sort of simultaneously. So we would go with the method of let's hit all of the stars at one time. Unfortunately, one of the executive teams I was doing this with said we would pick the weakest member of our executive team and send them up to the top of the screen and have everyone shoot at him while we then moved around behind and attack the other stars. Probably not the best for morale if we were going to do this exercise in a corporate setting to be discussing the weak link on the team, but yet that was one that got presented to us. The idea here was this comes from a real story. So if you're familiar at all with the story of the Band of Brothers, which was actually a great television show that was run on HBO some years ago, and it depicted the life of Easy Company of the U.S. military. It was led by a guy at the time named Lieutenant Richard Winters, and you can see Winters' photograph there on the left. And his team was literally presented with a map that looked about the way yours did on the previous slide. and he was given the orders, we need you to attack those cannon locations. Well, Winters took his team, climbed to the top of a hill, looked down across the battlefield, and he waited. He actually didn't attack the gun placements right away. And in his memoirs, he talks about how the Jeep with the messenger comes back in a few minutes and says, "Why have you not taken out these guns? This is incredibly important. You need to go. And go right now." And Winters, again, held his position and didn't attack. He actually waited about an hour until the fog lifted over the battlefield, because this took place fairly early in the morning one morning. And when the fog lifted, he did indeed see 4 cannon placements, not unlike the map that you saw on the previous page. But what was not told to him in the situation that he had been given was that there was a row of machine guns, and you can see on this map that Winters drew later, at the bottom of that map, it says German MG-42s. There was actually a row of machine guns guarding those cannons that he had not been told about. And if Winters had just marched down into that battlefield to take out those 4 guns, he would have been chopped to pieces. His team would have been chopped to pieces by those machine guns. Now, so what's the moral of the story here? Well, let me just come back to sales for a second. What if salespeople were given this mission, right? What would they have done? Would they have lined up 10 men across and just charged across these four X's like the shock and awe approach? Right? Maybe they would have. But what if they had been told that there were tanks? I don't think it would have mattered. I think salespeople today would have still lined up 10 across, and they would have charged across the battlefield. What if it was a totally different situation where they said, there's a battleship off the coast, what would you do? Salespeople would still probably line up 10 across and charge the battleship. What am I trying to say here? Salespeople are being taught over and over again that there is one way to attack the situations that we face. Sales training and sales processes and sales methodologies are constantly conditioning the salespeople to charge, right? Here's what we want you to do. We're going to train you one way to do this, and we want you to charge, right? And so no matter what the situation, whether it's battleships or tanks, we're being told as salespeople to charge across the battlefield. So what should we be doing, right? One of the things that I think that's awfully important for people to realize when they're thinking about sales processes and sales methodologies is another term that comes from the U.S. military. It's called data on previous engagement, or DOPE, right? And it might scare some of you to know that we are protected by men and women of the armed services who are using an acronym called DOPE. But DOPE stands for data on previous engagements. And what I think we need to be doing as sales organizations and as sales leaders is being smarter using data on previous engagements to help us determine what our sales processes or our sales methodology should be. And more importantly, we should use those data to help us realize that maybe there's more than one way to be successful with our sales teams. To rewind you this journey a little bit in terms of our research on this, back in 2012, we were approached, we being FSU, was approached by our advisory board. And the advisory board said, man, we would really love to know what really is the best methodology on the market today. We're being bombarded with ads, if you will, or marketing efforts from people who sell training and methodologies. And we would like you, FSU, to tell us which one is the best one. So we launched a series of studies starting in 2012, where we went to look to see, could we figure out what the best type of methodology was? And at the time, the Challenger book had been out for a while. And so we thought, well, let's start there. Let's see if we can replicate what Challenger found across their consultative, hardworking, lone wolves, relationship sellers. Let's see if that holds true in the research that we do. So we went out and talked to almost 800 sales reps. And by talk, I mean we gave surveys to almost 800 sales reps from 8 different industries. And the interesting thing we found was that we found similar findings as the Challenger data. Essentially what we found was that high performers were more likely to self-identify as Challenger salespeople. In other words, the disruptive or provoking approach that's outlined in the Challenger sales book, high performers are more likely to say they do that. Now, where our data differed a bit from the Challenger data was that high performers were also equally likely to self-identify as consultative sellers. The other thing that was sort of confirmed was that low performers are much more likely to say that they rely on a relationship or a relational strategy as a way to be successful. But the eye-opening moment of that research was while we were doing it, we were at a national sales meeting from one of our companies in the research, and a salesperson came up to me and said, "This was a really difficult survey for me to fill out." And of course, the next question was, "Tell me more about that." And he said, "Yeah, you asked us to sort of say what kind of seller we are, describe our sales style in the survey, but for me, it depends. It depends on the type of customer I'm working with, the type of situation that customer is in. Are they trying to make a fast decision or a slow decision? Are they price focused or are they service focused?" And he ran through a list of 7 or 8 things that sort of said, the way I sell depends on those things. Well, that was a pretty interesting moment for us because we said, maybe asking people to just tell us about your selling style is problematic. So we went and conducted a second study, this time with almost 1,500 salespeople from 3 different industries. And this time, we went to those companies that were involved in the study and we said, tell us about 3 different kinds of situations that your salespeople might face in their day-to-day routines. And so that we worked with the company, and it was almost like developing 3 small case studies where we had people come up with little cases about a type of customer that their salespeople might see. And then we went and said, tell us what you would do. So now we weren't asking the salesperson to tell us what their sales style was. We were asking them to tell us, in this situation, what would you actually do? And we had a series of tactics that aligned with a challenger style of selling versus a consultative style of selling, et cetera. And the interesting thing is here, when we did it this way, what we found was the situation was dictating the type of selling that high performers were doing. In other words, high performers had much more variance across the tactics that they would use across those 3 situations compared to low performers. So low performers tended to pick a strategy or an approach to selling, and they used it across all 3 situations, where high performers had incredible variance across those. And in fact, what we found this time was the challenger or any other style, no one style dominated more than 2 of the 9 different situations. Remember, we had 3 companies. They all gave us 3 situations. So there were 9 total situations. Challenger, for example, was the dominant one in 2 of the 9, which told us it is an effective strategy as well as consultative or relational selling, but only in certain situations. But then we realized something else. What if the actual situation was the problem, right? So in that particular study, we created situations that we thought were accurate depictions of what they face every day, and we asked salespeople how would they react. But what if we did a bad job on the cases? So we took a different approach. In our third study, we went to 635 salespeople, and this time we said, you tell us about different kinds of opportunities that you face every day. In other words, we had a list of questions that helped them to describe a specific opportunity that they had been working on. Except this time we also said, tell us about one you've won and one that you've lost. So tell us about a successful opportunity and an unsuccessful opportunity. And this time we used a clustering method to actually help us categorize the different kinds of situations that salespeople face every day. And so the interesting thing here is we weren't creating the situations, the salespeople were. And so once we clustered and found that in most of these 3 companies, there were somewhere between 4 and 6 different situations, we found the same thing again. High performers were changing their approach to those different situations. Lower performers were actually sticking to one style of selling. So finally, in 2013, one company said, this sounds pretty interesting. Can you go see if you could actually build some training around this idea of situations and strategies so that our guys are being adaptive? So the aha moment for us out of all of this research of almost 3,000 salespeople was, there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all selling approach. It doesn't work, right? High performers are out there adapting their selling strategy to the unique situations that they face. So if you were to ask someone, are you a challenger rep or consultative rep or a product-focused rep or a lone wolf? The answer is they're all of those things, High performance performers are all of those. What sets a high performer apart from everyone else is that they're able to adapt and be agile, moving from one strategy to the next based on what the situation calls for. So this was a great moment for me as a researcher. I got to go back to the FSU advisory board. At the time, there were about 40 companies on it. And we said, hey, 2 years ago, you asked us to tell us what methodology or process is the best one. We got something really cool to tell you. So we got them all gathered in a room and we said, you're asking the wrong question. When you sent us off on this journey 2 years ago, you asked us to think about what's the best methodology. And that was actually the wrong question. The question should have been, what methodologies are right? Methodologies, for the best, by the way, are right for the situations that your sales teams face on a regular basis. Now, this was meant to be sort of a drop the mic moment for me. I finally got to say something really smart and witty in front of 40 very fantastic sales leaders. This was very profound. I thought this was great. Really had people thinking about what we shared with them. And so I'm walking toward the cocktail hour, very excited and proud of myself, when finally someone stopped me and said, hey, that is really useful information for us. Now, how do we build agility in our sales teams? And of course, I was stopped in my tracks because we didn't spend time studying how do we do this. We just studied what should they do. So now we're back to the drawing board. It's 2014. We're trying to figure out how do we tell people what to do, how to build agile sales organizations so that their people can be adaptive. And unfortunately, when we looked across all of the sales training programs that we could get our hands on, we didn't find any really truly teaching this ability to be agile or adaptive as a sales philosophy. So we thought, who else has to train agility? In other words, if we step outside of sales, who else has to teach their people to be agile? Well, obviously, I alluded to one at the top of our presentation. The U.S. military is constantly teaching people like Richard Winters how to assess the situation, right? Which he did. He waited for the fog to lift. He saw what he was dealing with, and he built his plan. And we thought the military is a great place to study this. So in 2014, we did interviews with people who were located at some of the U.S. military's elite training programs. We went to Red Flag, which was a fighter pilot training program in Las Vegas. We went to the Army Sniper School in Fort Benning, Georgia. We had interviews with people from West Point and learned what the military does to be agile. Then we also took a look at the idea of sports teams. Sports teams are constantly having to be agile and training their people how to adjust on the playing field. And so as you see there, we went to some of the elite programs in sports and asked them, tell us more about how you teach players to be agile. And finally, we went to the medical industry. There's no book, unfortunately, for a doctor to use that says when a patient comes into the emergency room, do this every single time. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. So doctors have to learn to be agile. They have to see and read and diagnose a patient in a very quick amount of time and then treat them using an agile approach. So we learned from these outside contexts to say, well, and then what should we be doing with sales? And we really built a lot of it off. There is a book that the military has that's not how to do something. It's how do you build a process for being agile. The Battle Staff Handbook has some great frameworks in there for how do we build a process that allows our people to be agile out in the field. And when you think about what that book really is telling people to do is you have to gather situational intelligence, you have to develop situational readiness, and then you train and drill that. If you want to have an agile fighting team, in this case of the military, these are the 3 steps you have to constantly be working on in your organization. And so what we have found is that great companies, great sales organizations are starting to do something very similar. They're building this situational intelligence. They're building a profile of the types of situations that their people face every day. Now, I think it's important to stop here and say a situation is not the same as a segment. Because when we've presented this research to people in the past, they raise their hand and they say, Leff, we can stop you right here. We already do a great job of vertical, having our people attack verticals in different ways. Well, that's great. The problem here is if let's take healthcare, for example. If we sell computers, we sell networking, big network computers, and we sell laptop computers. And we're going to call on a healthcare customer. Well, the healthcare would be the vertical, but the problem is those are two completely different situations. The way the healthcare or that hospital is going to buy a laptop will be completely different than the way that hospital would go through the process of buying a new set of network servers to run the entire hospital. So the idea here is situations should be deal specific or opportunity specific, not customer level specific. We have to go deeper. Same for the U.S. military. We can't just say that the Russian army is going to fight their battles the same way. It depends on which unit, where are they located, how long have they been trained. There's lots of factors that are going to dictate how that Russian military might engage in a battle. And so we have to think about that when we're training our folks to say, whether it's Russia or any other enemy, how would we go about being prepared for that based on how they're going to approach the battlefield. So the next step around this is to map out your buying situations. Here's an example. This comes from a company that works in the senior living field. So this is a company that actually sells different types of senior living solutions, whether it's assisted living or independent living or even skilled nursing types of facilities. But these were some situations that when they sat down and mapped out what are we dealing with when it comes to the types of customers that walk through our door, you can see here they use some very company-specific factors to decide how to map out a situation. So in this case, they were talking about, is the family on board in terms of making this decision? How ready are they to make a decision? Do they have knowledge of our industry and what we do? How healthy is mom or dad or the grandparent in the situation? And when they map all those, what they found was through their data, there really is a pattern of situations that they face. In fact, they said there were 4 or 5 of these. And as you can just visually see, these are very different situations that they face, that their salespeople face on a regular basis. The other thing about if we start to build good situational intelligence, we can actually start to apply this to our pipeline analysis. So what we've seen world-class sales organizations do is begin to say, if these are the kinds of situations we have, where do we tend to win these and where do we tend to lose? So continuing with this example of the senior living company, you see here that they used, that they had high win rates when the family came in and there was some confusion about the best way, the best decision to make for their loved one. Or at the other end of the spectrum, when a customer came in based on a referral from another customer, they had high win rates. Unfortunately, they had low win rates under these other 2 situations, prepared shopper and tire kicker. Now, something that should point out is if we do an analysis of their pipeline, unfortunately, the pipeline has the most of the deals they win the least. So the percentage of prepared shoppers and tire kickers was quite high compared to the other 2, despite the fact that we don't win those very often. So the idea here is we can start to do some pretty interesting assessments of our pipeline. The next thing we have to do is build this thing called situational readiness. What strategies or tactics do we need to have ready to go to be successful? Well, if you go through and look, continuing with our senior living example, you have these 5 across the top were the situations, but down the left-hand side are the types of selling approaches. So a disruptive approach, sort of a ROI or value-based approach, simply pitching the community, being very good at describing why that's a good community, and then the consultative approach. And what you see in green are where the high performers had a very clear way that they were choosing the best one to go sell in. So 86% of high performers were choosing a disruptive strategy when the community confusion situation presented itself. Only 28% of the rest of the sales organization was taking this approach. Likewise, urgency, emergency, moderate win rates, but high performers were using a community pitch approach 55% of the time. Everyone else was only using it 36% of the time. So the idea there is we can start to use what high performers are doing to identify what is the right selling strategy to align to a particular situation that we face. Then the last thing we got to do is once we've built situational intelligence, we've built situational readiness, we know what to do. Now we have to build a training program that sort of trains this agility. And so what we see great people doing, and I'm using days, but this is more just a percentage of time spent. So about a third of the training program is usually spent around helping people understand, here's the kind of situations that we face, and here's how to diagnose them. Because obviously you have to teach people oftentimes how to use a good set of questions to determine, am I dealing with a community confusion or an urgent emergency situation, to use the senior living example. The next thing we have to do is we have to train people on the different strategies. So we need to be able to say, here's our disruptive strategy. Here's our consultative strategy. Here's how we have a value strategy for presenting the ROI or the business case for our business. And then we bring those two things together. Let's help people understand that in this situation, a particular situation, we're going to run sales strategy 1. And in a different situation, we're going to run sales strategy 2. And so on. And so we need to train people to bring the knowledge of situational intelligence together with the ability to align the right strategy to those situations. So that's kind of what we mean here when let me back up, I'm sorry. This is what we mean when we say great sales organizations don't teach one process. They teach variations of different kinds of sales strategies that help their people make adjustments in the field. Because here's what we don't want. We don't want people using one way. We know that doesn't work, at least not very often. We also don't want people using 999 different ways to be successful in sales. This is what one military person told us is what they called systematic adaptation. We want our people to adapt to the situation, but do it in a systematic way. In other words, we don't want them winging it. We want them to know that in a particular situation, you have latitude to move between some predetermined strategies that will help you be successful. And so they're putting a system in to allow their people to be agile. And again, sports teams do the same thing with plays, and the medical field does the same thing with different treatment options based on the situation. So the idea there is if that's what we're trying to get to as a sales organization, how do we do it? Right? And our research shows that it really does sort of take a village, because you can't just let training be your mechanism to do this. Right? So we just showed that you can build sort of a nice training program that teaches situation recognition, strategy, fluency, and then the ability to execute. But you also have two other aspects of this that have to be on board. Coaching, so your managers need to understand how this is going to work. And then marketing and the CRM, the analytics side of your business also need to be attuned to this philosophy of selling. But let's just explore the coaching one for a second. And I went to the University of Tennessee, so I'm going to have to be honest and in full disclosure that I have a bias that Peyton Manning is the greatest quarterback of all time. But when you think about even Peyton being the Hall of Fame quarterback that he is, he had good coaching over the years. But he had good coaching not just on how to throw the ball one way, but on how to be agile. And so what would have been bad coaching for Peyton Manning would have been, hey, Peyton, we need to score more points. Right? I think Peyton Manning knows he needs to score more points. Better coaching would have been, hey, when you take the field the next time, let's try to throw the ball more. Now, that's still not great coaching, but it's better. Good coaching would have been, hey, when we see the defense line up like they're going to blitz from the left side of the field, we want you to throw the ball to a specific person, to the tight end. Okay. Now, that is very specific, very directed coaching that's going to help Peyton be agile when he takes the field the next time around. Well, sales leaders and sales managers go through the same sort of progression of their ability to coach agility. Because bad coaching would be, I need you to sell more, right? We've all talked about coaching and how just telling salespeople they need to put more points on the board isn't helpful. Your salespeople know this already. That is not a coaching conversation. That's something else. Better coaching says, hey, in the next meeting, let's try to ask some more questions. Okay, well, that's good. That's sort of good going the right direction for good selling. But if we really want to coach agility, then what we need to say is, hey, when the customer calls and she's close to making a decision, we need to launch our educate and differentiate strategy. We need to launch a product pitch strategy in the situations where the customer is already way down the path of making a decision, and they just need us to tell them why they should pick us. Well, that's great. That's very directed agile coaching, because you're saying when the customer is in this situation, here's what we're going to do. So the key here is for managers to be thinking through, if these are the situations, again, using our senior living company as a metaphor, if these are the situations that we might face on a given sales engagement or buying situation, then what are we going to do? Where is the rep going to struggle in executing this? And as a manager, where do you need to be ready to jump in and help? So when you think about opportunity planning conversations, they're much more effective because the salesperson comes in and says, hey, I'm dealing with a community confusion situation here. Help me. And the manager should know things about that salesperson that says, okay, this rep is really going to struggle in this strategy, in this situation. So here's how I'm going to help them. So coaching improves when we take this agility, because we're not using a generic coaching model anymore. We're helping managers be very directed in how they're going to help salespeople through certain situations. Now, the last aspect of this is under the marketing CRM. So where we see a lot of improvement in helping salespeople be agile is in what marketing and the CRM team could do for the salesperson. Because remember, we said we have to be able to generate situational intelligence if we want our people to be agile. So the CRM team becomes a very helpful tool where the sales people could start to log what kind of situation they think they're dealing with. We've even seen some CRM systems where you put in some fact, answer a few questions, and then the system actually returns back. Here's the situation it sounds like you're dealing with. Okay. Now, the good news is if we track that over time, now we can do some really interesting analytics that allow our situational intelligence to be even more accurate. Because now, at any point in time, a sales leader could pull up and say, what's our pipeline in terms of the types of situations that we're facing? What is our win rate in those kinds of situations? And have those situations changed over time? In other words, yesterday we were very heavy on urgent emergency situations in senior living example, and today we're now even more leaning toward community confusion. Okay? So the situational intelligence gets better if the CRM team understands this agile approach and what you're trying to accomplish. Marketing is helpful too, because just as the military has people who literally study the type of missions that our men and women and fighting men and women have to face, they develop tools. They develop weapons and tools that help those people be successful in those missions. Well, marketing becomes the person who can help with that, or the people that can help with that. Marketing becomes a function that now says, okay, we now understand the situation that you're facing, the strategy you're trying to execute, and so we're going to bring tools to the table that help you execute that very specific strategy. So marketing needs to be on board and very much up to speed on this idea of systematic agility. So in my last few minutes, I just want to close with a few mistakes that we see companies make as they try to adopt an agile approach to their sales organizations. The first one is they fail to do this at all. Okay, and I think this is probably the most common mistake, which is we still see an awful lot of sales organizations who either are using no sales process or sales methodology at all, which I would argue none is still worse than one, right? But the next mistake is that they're using one, because I still believe in my heart of hearts, having been also a salesperson in addition to an academic, there is no such thing as one way to sell. So pushing one process or one methodology to the field is inherently flawed, right? And so using an agile approach is really how you get past mistake number one. Number two, I've already touched on, assuming that industry verticals or segments are the same as buying situations. They're not. Even within a healthcare account or a finance account or a manufacturing account, we could have different situations. We could literally have different situations playing out in the same customer. Because even one customer told us, I don't buy the same way every single time. Well, that's big news to salespeople, should be big news to salespeople, that if that's the case, then we can't sell the same way every time. Number three, they do this. They like this agile approach. They take a snapshot of the market. They figure out what types of what types of situations they're facing. but then they never update it, because this should be a living, breathing thing. In sports terms, the team that we played yesterday is not going to do the same thing that the team we're facing next week is going to do. And so we need someone to own the intelligence process that's constantly updating and helping us understand what are the new situations that we might be facing based on a new market we're going to enter, or a new product that we're going to launch, or a new reaction from a competitor. What are some new situations that have been created? And then obviously the strategies might change. So what worked really well a year ago may not be what's going to work well tomorrow. So we need someone who's watching and monitoring, using those CRM analytics we mentioned, to develop readiness, helping people understand our strategy needs to change if we're going to be successful in some of these situations. And then finally, the last is that people decide, yes, we're going to do these things, but we're going to leave it all to training. The training department has to be the person to do all this. And most training organizations just aren't built for this. This is a new way of thinking for them. It really does take a group of people coming together to drive this home. And so leaving it in one group, whether it's training or marketing, is a mistake. You need to bring multiple functions to the table to be able to really drive agility, just like there are multiple functions of the U.S. military who come together to make sure our forces are as agile as they can be in the field.